Perhaps I could pose Weng Hin a question in your experience in Singapore and Yangon. I mean, Chou shared a lot of experience in Singapore trying to open up buildings to make it meaningful to the new generation of Singaporeans. I think just 30 years ago, the civic district was really public in appearance, but none of us could go into it. I think for Yangon, do you think that there's hope or are there plans for the opening of these formerly public buildings to the public of Burma?
Well, generally, definitely there's a direction, there's moving towards the direction. I mean, the example that I showed, this luxury hotel, is actually part of a larger old and new kind of mixed-use development that has a shopping mall and hotels and things like that. And the ground floor actually is made quite accessible. The intention is to make it quite accessible and not close it off to the public. Yeah. When the government of Myanmar moved the capital from a administrative center to Naypyidaw in the late 1990s, a lot of these buildings are vacated. And through the various agencies, they are slowly released one by one for private developers to redevelop, basically. Yeah, so that's the general trend. So once this revert from the state ownership to private ownership, and majority of these are commercial developments anyway. So there is a move towards that. But of course, the very slightly alarming thing is the speed in which these properties are leased out to a private developer in the absence of any how to call that, a framework that can able to control or manage the degree of change that will come to the city.
Maybe I'll ask a question to pick up from some of the comments made in the presentations. I think Weng Hin, in one of the concluding slides, you mentioned that general perception of heritage conservation is somewhat anti-progress and anti-development. And I think Chou may also mentioned that the Tanjong Pagar example where we have kept the shop houses, but we have allowed the functions to evolve, many of which became sort of cafes, restaurants. From the Heritage Board, we often get comments that there are this loss of the intangible cultural heritage that's associated with the built spaces. Maybe I'd just like to maybe seek comments, including Kelvin. I think, for example, Kelvin, you're familiar with Tiong Bahru, and there are also many such comments about loss of traditional businesses in the area. So maybe some comments from the people.
I think for us, it's always a question of balance. And to some extent, I think it's more important that we allow the buildings to continue to be relevant and useful so that they continue to contribute to the precinct and be part of the everyday life. To some extent, it's nice to keep the traditional traits, but I don't know how much of it we can keep in relation to the stock of conservation buildings that we would want to keep. I think as we progress, it's probably not very realistic to expect, for example, the whole Tanjong Pagar, for example, to still retain the traditional traits of the past. Of course, then it's a question of, how much can we keep? Yeah. And how blunt we want the levers to be.
I think in this part, Mr. Chou mentioned about Kampong Glam placemaking. I mean, we will share with you the dilemmas we face with Kampong Glam in particular. For example, Arab Street to us is very important. It is, from what we know, the oldest intact shopping street in Singapore. You come to Singapore, you go to Arab Street to buy fabrics. I mean, you come from KL, Penang, Jakarta, you come to the Arab Street. But that trade has a life of its own that is beyond planning. It's tied to bigger economic movements in Singapore. So what should we do? Similarly, The restaurants in the area, I mean, Kampong Glam is known for its historic array of halal food of different cuisines. Between a traditional biryani restaurant or a modern halal cafe or something else, where's the balancing point? But because we don't know the right balancing point, but we know that there's a point somewhere, we are now working with the community to start discussing what is the position that we should take for this area, and what are the planning tools we could collaborate with to come up, because the local people know the area best. As the experts, we will have to think of the tools to help their dreams come true as far as possible, but I think we need to recognize that we can't always have the perfect solution. But that's work in progress, Kampong Glam, with the community.
Maybe just to add on, I think what you're talking about is gentrification and how it displaces original usage and communities out of the neighborhood. I think Singapore, back in the 60s and 70s, because of the large-scale urban renewal carried out, I think that the communities kind of were displaced from the traditional neighborhood already, and what you're left with is a big the shells of the heritage buildings. So that content you can't really forcibly bring it back. But I think like what Kelvin says, the place management is one good, definitely a positive development. At least from then on, after notwithstanding the gentrification, what happens next, and can the process of change be more guided and involve the community much more, rather than compared to the way maybe in 1670s it was very much done in a top-down manner. And I think a very important aspect of, okay, you have lost that connection with this, the physical connection with this intangible heritage already, but there's nothing stopping us to carry out research in this area, and try to recover it from oral history and other forms of documentation, and then promote it and celebrate it. And I think, we can. I think what's interesting for me is we can see different countries and different cities taking this, weighing the importance of this. For example, in Georgetown, I think it's just trying to do something quite different, with which the conservation movement is pretty much a ground up situation, and I think over there they're trying to manage this process of gentrification as well, and celebrating the more intangible heritage. So, not to give away too much of what Selma is going to speak about tomorrow. Yeah.
I hope that as a society we have a hopeful, positive approach to heritage of the future. As Chou said, Capitol Theatre now is a place for parents and children to create new memories for the future. For something like Tanjong Pagar, where we inherited a vacated neighborhood, and half of the street is now a wedding street, we could be confident to say that, for 20 years, thousands of couples have gone to Wedding Street to choose their dress, their gowns, etc., and to create a new memory for the future. I think that's that's an equally positive outcome that can happen if we were to continue this kind of very careful approach. And in fact, say that the whole of Old City, integrated planning meant that we actually put in new people in city center through social housing, of which Weng lives in the Duxton Pinnacles. I think that addition of over 1,000 units of local families into Tanjong Pagar will give a different change to the neighborhood to make it even more everyday in certain ways. So I think conservation areas survive not just on the buildings, but the wider context of livelihoods and communities.
Yes, we have a question.
I just have a question. I must say I agree with Weng Hin when you did say that we should invest more in the research of these buildings. I hope that all of you, the four of you, you represent the government, and please invest more in those things.
No, he doesn't represent the government.
Oh yes, that's right, you don't. Because I think that especially when you one of you did mention the intangible, a lot of it actually is lost in time, especially our colonial past with the buildings that we have. I was online, and in fact, since then, I've been talking to a good friend of mine, Chigen, where we talked about an example of the former municipal, city hall, and Supreme Court, and the wonderful public space that you have all created to create an art district. Now, as you know, much of the talk was the link between these two wonderful buildings and the creation. And he did say, oh, actually, the French came up with the idea of creating the panka, that golden thing, the link between. So, of course, I quickly then told him, but the panka was redundant by the 1920s and 30s, and why would the French want to introduce something which the British would say it is redundant at that time? There must be a better link. But then I understand, in what you said, to create a common public space, you're trying to interlink the whole area. However, there's an intangible thing that we forgot, which is in our government. When, especially our form of government, we believe in the separation of the different branches. There is an executive branch, and then there's the judiciary branch. We do not want, we often feel that these two should not interfere. And so when Dorrington Ward created Supreme Court, he expressly delinked that part, because he felt that it was symbolic, never to show the symbolic link between the two, because you have, and that's something which we uphold. So I often say that, that, of course, in developing a good space to link between the two, it's very honorable to do that. But we must always remember some of these intangible things. And those things can only be discovered when you actually go and research it. Right? Because how would I know? If I had to plan and I was an architect, I would think it's so wonderful that you link two spaces, and in the tropical air, the elements are so cruel here. So you create this. Of course, it's a good thing. But at the same time, if you look at our history and you realize, all these arguments we've made in our society, in our government, we fought in elections about the separation between the powers of judiciary and its influence. So it's a symbolic thing that, we should realize. So I think that, especially also in Capitol Theatre as well, you've talked about how wonderful it is. But then Capitol Theatre is also Capitol Building. There are other units in that. And then when you try to link, you find that sometimes history isn't so convenient and so nice. And I think that when you research into it, you talk to the communities that you can expand, which you've done wonderfully in Arab Street. You discover these, and then you realize that you can do it more sensitively, and I wish you all the best in doing so. But it also means maybe it's good that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, has lived on, and he is not here, because if Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was here and you said, well, we need to engage so many people, he'll tell you you are reducing the GDP growth by a third. I want the Singapore economy to grow at 12%, but in a much more graduated process. Maybe we can only grow at 2.5% a year. So perhaps, as we mature, but things have to go a little slowly, maturely, but it would be more sustainable. It would be certainly much more successful, and I think that you all are going the right route. Thank you.
Okay, any reactions? If not, we do have a question, actually.
Maybe that's why we didn't choose to put another hotel in City Hall, but turn it to the National Art Gallery.
So we do have a question on the screen here. Asking, the question is, could you tell us, in the case of Kampong Glam, the dialogues with the locals are conducted before they have moved out or after they have moved out? I guess it's for Zhou Mei.
I think as with all the historic districts in Singapore, there was a major exercise of resettlement up to the 80s where citizens were given the opportunity to have their own flat in public housing. So when we started place management in Kampong Glam about maybe 4 years ago, more earnestly, in a sense, the residential community was no longer there. But we have to recognize that in any historic district, you have many communities who are deeply invested in it, even if they don't live there. There can be past residents, there can be people who go to the institutions, be it the mosques or the schools, and you have your traders. So all these voices are just as important as the landlords and as the current businesses. So that's why we have this working group and not just the business association, because we recognize in any precinct, you have multiple interests. And in the Singapore context, URA, we are privileged to be able to create that neutral platform where parties can come and talk. I think we have to recognize that there are many egos in the community, and sometimes without a neutral party or conflict of interest, they will not talk. It will be hard for, say, a school to join the business association because they cannot, but they are part of the community. So that's the role we play. It will be an interesting outcome, and we look forward to, I think, everyone's support for it.
We do have another question on screen, talking about the balancing of the resources between development and promotion of software. Would either of you want to answer that? So maybe because of the time, we'll take this as the last question.
Can I just clarify the question? It'll be from this floor, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you asking if money that can be spent for development should be spent on things like car-free Sunday? Is that the question? But I can talk a little bit about Car-Free Sunday and why we think it's important. I think Car-Free Sunday is trying to do quite a few things in one go. I think it's trying to open up the civic district, but it's also trying to, I guess, demonstrate that there are better ways of using the spaces that we have. I guess what we're hoping that it also does is to pose questions on, do we need so much road space? Are there other ways we can go around the city? Do we get a better sense of place if we don't have so many cars around? Can we live without a car? I think we think it's important to do demonstration projects like that, even though they do cost a bit of money, because sometimes without the demonstration projects, you are not able to actually try it out and experience for yourselves. And we're really couching this as a pilot to get the messaging out, to get people to come and join us, enjoy the space, spread the word, and have a discussion about it. Because I think it's only through discussion and debate that we can kind of progress and I guess think about what we want to do for our city in the future.
Okay. I think there was another question, but it was somehow answered in the earlier discussions about the difficulties of keeping the traditional community kind of traits in the area. So if that's all, maybe I'll hand back to Kelvin to close for the day. Oh yeah, okay, just maybe a quick question, and this will be the absolute last question, please.
Okay, thank you. I think URA, LTA, HDB and PUB, all are doing very good jobs for us in Singapore. But I think the private sector, in terms of the professionals, need more work. I would say that if we could look at some more places for them to plan, in terms of master planning or whatever, I think the private sector, especially the planners, will be more active and able to contribute their share of the work I know we have focus group, but sometimes the focus group are perhaps some ideas are carried out, but if the professionals outside is doing more, I think that will make our city much better as well. Thank to all of you as well, because you formulated everything for us. Thank you.
Actually, that's not the first suggestion we've heard on this. So I mean, it's something we do think about. Yeah. So we'll keep in touch.
But I think that's why for the first time we have CPD points for all three professions, not just architects, because the planners are so important in this process. But I think I'd like to conclude by thanking all the speakers for their great sharing today, and our hosts, the Embassy of France,